You are listening to UpTalk with Sean Conahan. The gloves are off, and it's time to have a chat.
Hello, people. Welcome to episode 5 of the podcast. It is with a heavy heart that I record this intro for the episode, as we are a day into finding out that we've lost a brother here in Nova Scotia. The most recent brother. There's been many. The most recent one, Marc Boudreau, fantastic medic who we lost far too soon. I would like to dedicate this episode of the podcast to him and to his family. And later on at the end of the podcast, I'm going to have a special little tribute to Marc. We're going to get to hear what Marc did, some of the stuff Marc did when he wasn't working as a paramedic. Marc was a phenomenal fiddle player. He was a child prodigy and very well known in the music industry, especially in Cape Breton, for his fiddle playing. So we're going to hear some of that later on. That's going to be a treat. So on that note, my guests this week are the Nova Scotia Minister of Labour and Advanced Education, the Honourable Kelly Regan, and the Nova Scotia Minister of Health and Wellness, the Honourable Glavine. I have conversations with them about the state of PTSD assistance in the province for first responders and what work is being done to ensure that first responders have access to that help in an efficient and timely manner. Very good chats with them. I hope you enjoy it. Also, Dr. Robin McGee is back to teach us about Cognitive Reprocessing Therapy. So that should be fun as well. So without further ado, guys, and as always, I'll thank my sponsors, Rest Ed Seminars, the Compass Rose Health and Wellness Center, and Dan's Son Photography for supporting the podcast. You can find out about them on my website, www.uptalkpodcast.com. You'll see links to them. And please click on those and check them out. They're all doing good work in the field of mental health and helping to destroy the stigma surrounding mental health. So please check them out. And as always, I want to give a trigger warning for this episode. For those of us that have trigger issues, make sure you're in a good mind space, a good head space before you listen, so that you're able to truly enjoy the podcast and learn all you can from it. So without further ado, let's get started. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome the Honourable Kelly Regan, Minister of Labour and Advanced Education for Nova Scotia, to the podcast. Welcome, Minister Regan. How are you today?
I'm great, Sean. Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to come on your show today to talk about PTSD.
Well, and I thank you. It's a very important topic, and we definitely need to hear from our government. So I'm really happy to have you on, and thank you for making time. As you know, I know you're aware of the numbers. In 2015, 39 first responders and 12 military personnel lost their lives due to suicide, which is a staggering number, and one that I believe we can start to make a dent in by just having the conversation and getting proper resources out there to people. On that note, Kelly, it's in Nova Scotia we have 314 approximately fire departments, and I'll stick to fire departments because that's sort of what I know best, and many with new and upcoming young leadership that are coming up through the fold, and they may be wondering who to turn to or where to turn to better support their members who may have PTSD or before they get PTSD. So are there any resources in place to support those leaders?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, Sean, because actually later this month, from the 17th to 19th, Safety Services Nova Scotia is having a conference, as we do each year, and it's LAE and Workers' Comp are closely involved in organizing for it. And this year, we're focusing on what's called the human element of safety. And we have some keynote speeches and one includes Jean-Michel Blais, the Chief of Police of Halifax, and he's going to talk about leadership in times of crisis. We're talking about stress on the job, employing workers with PTSD, all kinds of the occupational health and safety issues around mental health. Well, I'm very excited about it. I'll be at the conference for a bit, and I just think it's something we have to talk about more, and part of what we need to do is remove the stigma, of course,
Absolutely.
of PTSD and other workplace stress-related illnesses.
So is there a website people can go to check that out if they want information on that?
Safety Services NS, I think, .ca, or just Google safety, cutting edge safety services Nova Scotia, and that should get you to the information on the conference.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that, Kelly. I appreciate that information. That's awesome. Now, in general, so if you're a first responder or a member of the public, like what is the appropriate organization within government to handle general inquiries about resources to learn more about PTSD?
Well, again, it would depend on whether you're an employee, whether you're covered by workers' comp. Not in Nova Scotia, only some of our first responders, but that would include most paramedics, are covered by WCB. Some occupations, which would include firefighters and police officers, are specifically excluded from mandatory coverage under Workers' Compensation Act. So some forces are covered, some forces are not, and some, for example, at the time of amalgamation, the Halifax Police and Fire Services decided to go with private coverage.
Right.
So, but if you're covered under WCB, that would be the first place I would go. Workers' Comp has been, has just recently done a mail out to all of the WCB covered first responders in the province to make sure that they're aware of what coverage exists and so that folks know what coverage is available to help.
Right. Perfect. And so you mentioned some coverage. So is there any coverage out there even if you are strictly a volunteer first responder?
I'm not 100% sure on that, but I do know that some forces will purchase coverage for their firefighters. I don't know if the breakdown would be in terms of volunteer or employed, but they can, and the cost isn't great. And I say that bearing in mind, of course, that many of our municipalities have straitened circumstances, but when we've looked into it for other coverages, it's not a huge cost. So some of them have purchased that.
Excellent. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about, Mr. Regan, is I know that in 2014 there was a private members bill that was brought forward to try to deal with WCB and changing legislation revolving presumptive benefits, and I only bring that up as just a reference point. I know that other provinces in the country, such as Manitoba, Alberta, Ontario, just recently this week, and New Brunswick is in the works, are trying to combat trying to combat this issue and trying to bring about some changes. Is there work now being done in Nova Scotia, and what are some of the challenges that you're looking into as far as trying to get this done?
Well, you know what? It's interesting, but before that time, we didn't even have any statistics in Nova Scotia around the number of first responders who were filing for workers' comp because of PTSD. So that was the first thing that we did. We started keeping statistics.
Right.
So in 2015, we had 23 first responders file for workers' comp claims to do with PTSD. So the first thing was to try and understand, were we seeing a lot of refusals? Were a lot of people being turned down? What we do know is that, in fact, PTSD claims are approved at a much higher rate than is for other psychological illnesses on the workplace. So that was the first thing, was to understand what we're dealing with. The other thing was to clarify the policy around PTSD, because and I want to thank you for doing this podcast, because I have to say there's an awful lot of misinformation out there, because not everybody understands. I've heard all kinds of different stories that it's a single incident only, and you have to file within 1 year of that incident. That's not what it is. That's not what it is. In fact, it can be multiple incidents. It's 1 year. You have to file within 1 year of the diagnosis. But even I would urge any worker, any first responder, even if they don't think their particular case fits, to contact WCB, because every case is different,
Right.
and there could be mitigating factors. So I would urge anybody to reach out if your workplace is in fact covered under WCB, to reach out to WCB for that, because every case is individual.
Absolutely, yeah. I would advocate for that as well. You know, you won't get information if you don't ask. So if you need some help and you're wondering, reach out, make some phone calls, ask some people, and because you definitely need to get that information for sure. I mean, what are the big challenges do you think that there are to making changes like that, as far as legislatively?
Well, I'm not sure there's so much a challenge to it legislatively. It's simply that people have to understand what benefits are available to them.
Okay.
You know, typically, if someone does file for it, usually if you have your PTSD diagnosis,
right,
and of course you need that no matter whether it's presumptive or regular diagnosis, but we typically would pay their benefits within 3 weeks.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, is it fair to say then, Minister Regan, that this is on the radar of the government, and they are trying to formulate something to, for the near future to provide better help, better protection for first responders when it comes to, if there are any tweaks to be made to WCB, once we know how it works, is it fair to say that that you will be working on it just to try to?
Well, I mean, I think our first line of defense was to provide clarity around this, because I think a lot of people weren't coming forward because they thought they weren't covered, because they were hearing that for example, if you had been involved in Swiss Air, because that had taken place a number of years ago, that if you had PTSD after that, if a year had passed in Swiss Air, you weren't covered. Well, that's not true. It's 1 year from diagnosis. So if you weren't diagnosed back then, then that's okay. It's when the symptoms manifest, and we know they don't always manifest right away.
Very true. No, that's a very good point. Ms. Regan, are there any discussions or plans in the works to create any form of working group or steering committee to focus on the issues relating to PTSD from a provincial first responder perspective?
We're all working together. I think you'll have a conversation with Minister Glavine, and he'll sort of outline some other work that's going on.
Okay.
But I think it's fair to say that we're working across a number of different departments. We work with WCB, the Temaconter.
Nice. Okay.
Right. We're working with those folks. Vince Savoya. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah, for sure.
I want to pronounce it the French way, but
I've done that too.
Yeah. The Temaconter Foundation was here, within the last year or so, doing a dinner. So actually, Minister Fury and I both attended that dinner, had a chance to meet Vince. He's actually been at my department, and we are working on some things which unfortunately are not quite ready for me to talk about today, but I hope to have a further conversation with you in the future about some of these. That
would be awesome. I mean, if any time you're ready to announce anything, I would love to hear about it. For sure, and we'll have you back on. Absolutely. Thank you for your time, and I will try to keep you much longer, Kelly. But obviously, in light of recent events here provincially, obviously we're getting through a winter. We've had many fatality MVCs that people have responded to, motor vehicle collisions, people have responded to. We've had many large-scale fires around the province, some of the fatalities. We had an incident in the valley at Black River Lake where we lost a snowmobiler through the ice. And obviously, most recently, the story of Cody Glode, a firefighter in the Truro area who we lost due to suicide, and obviously has been related to some mental illness issues. Keeping all that in mind, and in light of that, what would you say? Are there any comments, if you could speak directly to the first responders in this province who may have PTSD or may be struggling and don't know where to turn, what would you say to them?
What I would say is, and I have a niece who's a first responder, who's a paramedic. So, this is a subject near and dear to my heart. My brother used to be a volunteer firefighter as well. What I would say is, reach out. I know that sometimes it's difficult to make that first call, whether it's to WCV if you're covered under there, or if it's to the mental health crisis line, 1-888-429-8167. I would encourage you to reach out because there is help available, and we want to make sure that our first responders are taken care of in the same way that they've taken care of us.
That's perfect. No, I thank you for that, Kelly, and again, thank you for your time. I want to tell you that I wish you all the best, and I wish you, Godspeed in the work that you're trying to do for this topic. And if there's anything that myself or the podcast can ever do to help that along, or to take part in any kind of group or committee or anything like that, you just have to say the word, and I will definitely be there. Again, thank you for coming on, and be safe, and all the best to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the work you're doing to get the word out.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, take care.
Thanks, you too.
At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce everyone to the Honourable Leo Glavine, Nova Scotia Minister of Health. Thank you for joining us today, Leo. How are you?
Well, look, really pleased to join you, to spend a bit of time, around PTSD, where we are currently, and more importantly, what we need to do here in the future.
Awesome. That's great. I've been looking forward to talking to you. We'll hit on a few topics, and obviously, if you have anything that you'd like to say that's something I didn't bring up, obviously feel free. One thing I would like to ask you right off the bat, as the Minister of Health, are you comfortable that the practitioners and clinicians within mental health are adequately able to service the needs of first responders with PTSD? Because I know it's sort of a new subject to deal with, and everybody's sort of getting up to speed. How do you feel with how they're doing?
Well, I know that, at the current time, we are certainly using the complement of psychiatrists, psychologists, counseling therapists, to work with those who are suffering from PTSD. One of the areas that I feel we need to make improvements in is in the primary care area with our GPs and nurse practitioners, who very often are the first ones that will have someone suffering PTSD, come to their office. Right. And so to that end, we are currently working with doctors, nurse practitioners, to put them through, the mental health, the professional development curriculum that will certainly help them with the overall area of mental health, but it'll also deal with some of the signs and symptoms of PTSD. And I think the more on the front line that we can assist, that's going to make a difference, and then they can be then sent and referred to those who have some specialty around PTSD. What I do know is that more will need to be done, and I think across the province, the more our regional hospitals and the mental health teams associated with them can deal with PTSD, I think better outcomes will result. We know that we have had tragic consequences. We have first responders who go through long, debilitating periods where they are unable to work. Family issues result, and so doing more and highly qualified people to assist is part of what will be necessary.
Awesome, because you're right. These are the people that are getting sort of confronted with it right away, and they may not know quite what to do or the resources to point somebody in, in order for them to get the help they need. So that's awesome. That's great that you guys know that, and you're looking to help those very important practitioners deal with that issue. So I thank you for that. Thank you very much. The next thing I wanted to ask you is, I know that Minister Regan touched on it, that people can call in to WCB if they have a question of whether or not they're covered or not. One question I wanted to ask you was, what's the appropriate branch of government for people in general to contact if they have questions about PTSD? Is there a branch that can handle that?
Well, yes, there are the two streams. There's the all-important mental health area,
right,
as well as those who are off work and now without income. WCB is a must in that area.
right.
So just in the past few months, we've been meeting as a number of departments, which and will also include some of the organizations on the ground, like the fire marshal's office, EHS. We're going to involve a whole number of people in putting together, a plan, one that will involve, much easier access than what we, currently have in place, and a number of recommendations will come forward from this multi-department approach to PTSD.
Right.
Presently, I would say yes, it's going through the mental health services in one's community and contacting, WCB while we put in place, I think, what should be a very easy access process for those who are suffering PTSD, because in many ways, they do become not as able to function through those normal channels and processes and delays. Those are all very frustrating. I believe a just-in-time service, as much as possible, can result with earlier treatment and better outcomes. This is an issue as a former firefighter of 15 years.
Wow, okay.
Earlier in my career, where I became very, very familiar with PTSD, but I would say back in the early 80s, we weren't calling it that.
No, for sure. I mean, I don't even know if you would have called it anything other than a bad day or just a normal feeling, and then we wouldn't talk about it. We would go home and crack a beer or do something else to try to, just try to get those feelings go away. We certainly wouldn't talk about it with anybody.
Absolutely, and I remember, a time very early in my career was as a firefighter. It was probably around 82, 83,
right,
when we had one of those, unbelievable and unfortunate circumstances where we went to a house fire, and 3 in our department each carried out a little child that day who had succumbed to smoke inhalation, and those firefighters. It was a first-time experience, but it was a life-impacting experience, and 2 of the 3 found it very difficult to come back and put on the gear. Again, would there be another such incident? And I remember as a teacher, being asked to sit with the affected firemen, to listen. What we would call today probably basic talk therapy, and to allow them to express that grief and trauma that they were trying to work through. And I know that these are incidents that stay with people, and then you get the accumulation of a number of these, which our first responders, our EHS, our police, and in some communities, firefighters have multiple incidents like this as well. So it is very, very real, and some of my experience in the fire department, I've been able to do a little bit of educating with people who sometimes say, why so many people suffering PTSD? Is all of this, a very real condition? And I'm able to bring that perspective of how very real and how debilitating on a person's life and relationships that it can be.
Well, that's great. It's nice to know, obviously from your experience that you know exactly what our firefighters and first responders face on a daily basis, since you did that yourself. That means a lot. I know that I talked to Minister Regan about WCB and challenges of looking to see if there are any tweaks that needed to be made, and she mentioned like one of the big obstacles at first was just getting numbers, about how many first responders are looking for help for PTSD, and then also getting information out there for people to realize, what the WCB rules were, because there were some misunderstandings about it only has to be within a year of diagnosis, not within a year of an actual incident, which some people didn't know. From your perspective, from a sort of a global health perspective, what are some of the challenges you think that are there in order to move forward? Are there any big challenges other than just getting together and doing it, or?
Well, I believe now that we have started this whole reflection on what we can do better and what we need to put in place. I believe is well underway. One of the areas that again I realized was missing was a mental health process called trauma-informed care, okay. And since becoming minister and here at the Department of Health and Wellness, this now has been introduced as a standard of care. And what it really teaches those on the front lines is that they're to handle trauma-related cases, right. And not in fact to presuppose people in these situations in regards to past traumas. So I think just that enlightenment and that practice now that we are getting across the province to a greater degree, I think is going to really change how we respond to those who are suffering either in an acute situation, right. or one that is the result of a career. So I think we're moving to a much better place. And as Minister of Health and Wellness, my first responsibility is to have in place across the province, build that community capacity to be able to respond. Right. Having, a few specialists here in Metro is just not good enough. Okay. And I'm pleased to say that more and more of our frontline people are responding with this trauma-informed care practice.
Great. No, that's great. And I know that Minister Regan had mentioned that, there are things in the works that, of course, aren't ready to be announced yet. And I extended the invitation to her and wanted her to know, and you to know, that if it ever comes to the time where you guys are going to announce changes or to announce something for this issue, I would love to be present for that. I would love to have you back on the podcast to talk about that. I wanted to extend that invitation to you as well.
Well, Sean, I want to thank you for this opportunity, just to let, those who will listen in to what you're doing, that, creating awareness, bringing knowledge to this issue, as well as, that professional care and a compassionate approach, I think will be the basis and the essence of us dealing with this issue. I know that in my community, which is the Kingston Greenwood area, right. The military now have really stepped up their response. They've had a number of their members come back from Afghanistan, coming back now, especially from the ISIS right. that is in Kuwait. So we're seeing a growing group of expertise, and I think hopefully we can tap into that to learn more and to gain ground on this issue in the province.
Absolutely, and also if you think at all I may be of any assistance in any way possible for this kind of issue, please let me know. I'd love to take part in any discussion or committee or discussion group that you may have, just to shed some light on the issue. I just want to extend that as well, that I'd be more than willing to take part, Leo. And in keeping with that, just to end things off here, obviously we're getting through as I said to Kelly, a normal winter of many motor vehicle collisions with fatalities that people responded to, and fatality fires. And then we obviously had the issue in Black River Lake where we lost a snowmobiler.
that lots of people were looking for in the aftermath of that, and also most recently firefighter Cody Glode from the Truro area, who we lost due to some mental health issues as well. So what I'd like, Leo, is if you could say something to those first responders who may have PTSD or may encounter into the future, if they were in front of you looking for, any kind of guidance or assistance, what would you tell them?
I would, first and foremost say this is a condition. This is a set of, symptoms that may, range from mild to severe, that are no different than problems associated with a medical condition. Right. Severe back pain that lingers and needs, surgical intervention.
Right.
The same trauma experience that PTSD brings should be seen as no different.
Right.
They need, they need help, which we must provide to the greatest degree possible. But we must always give them comfort as they go through those type of personal trials. And I can assure you that it is also family, co-workers, friends that are impacted by PTSD. And so I think the greatest amount of awareness and support that we can bring, that must be our practice.
Awesome. That's excellent, Leo. Thank you very much again for making time, and I'll let you get on with your day. But thank you for coming on the podcast. I hope to have you on again and hope to hear more about this issue from the Nova Scotia government in the near future. And so thanks again. Be safe and have a great day.
Thank you, Sean, and keep up, the great path that you have taken for those in your community and probably well beyond.
Well, thank you. I will. It's my pleasure.
And now, it's time for Clinically Speaking with Dr. McGee.
The doctor is in. I'd like to welcome Robin back to the podcast. How are you now, Robin?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us again. Today, I and my listeners would like to learn about cognitive processing therapy.
Alrighty then. Cognitive processing therapy is considered a best practice therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's used extensively in the Veterans Administration hospitals in the United States, along with EMDR, which is the other best practice approved treatment. But there's 4 parts to cognitive processing therapy. The aim of it is to sort of help a person manage distressing thoughts by gaining an understanding of the thoughts and coping and so forth. So there's 4 parts to it. The first part is just learning about PTSD. So it's sort of education about specific PTSD symptoms, how they come about, how treatment can help them, sort of an education, I guess, about the condition and why the symptoms manifest the way they do. The next part is helping the person become aware of thoughts and feelings about that they're having. So, for example, the thought, I should have known that would happen. I should have known that that ICD was going to go off. I should have known that the car tires were going to go off the road. I should have known that. And then people get really quite stuck on thoughts like that. So CPT helps people learn to pay attention to their thoughts about, first, there's a big component is paying attention to the thoughts and then sort of noticing about how those thoughts affect you, so that if you have a thought like I should have known that, you're going to feel ashamed and guilty and bad, and those feelings will follow thoughts like that. So it's a lot of teaching around the thought-feeling connection. So the next part has to do with the skills around, once you become more aware of thoughts and feelings, it's about techniques to help question the thoughts you're having. So with sort of using worksheets. So there's in a worksheet, someone might write down, I should have known that would happen. And then in the sort of competing thoughts, a thought that would challenge that assumption of thought might be, Well, I don't have a crystal ball. I didn't know. None of us have the crystal ball. None of us know what's going to happen. And it wasn't, in fact, in my control to know that would occur. So those kinds of things, so just sort of telling yourself the truth about what you could have known, what you could have done, what was reasonable for anyone in those circumstances. And so then noticing or reading the feelings you have that will change, perhaps based on sort of cognitively challenging the not so helpful thought, and then noticing the change in emotion that follows after that. So people, there's a fair amount of homework associated with this kind of therapy.
Okay, right.
Where people keep track of their thoughts on these thought-feeling records over days and days. And so that helps, and also thoughts you have in your day-to-day life, not just thoughts about trauma, but,
Well, I'm sorry, one question I would have about that is, because I know for me, if you were to give me homework where I have to track things with how my PTSD sort of affects me, is that a point where a lot of people maybe they're not able to complete that task?
That's exactly right, and that's, okay. I have, just being honest, this is why I don't do cognitive processing therapy anymore, because people don't do homework. People don't like to do homework. Homework is taxing. Now,
because right now I can't remember to pick up the milk when Amanda tells me. So, doing homework would be tough.
Yeah. And in all my years of doing that, I found that it was a rare person who could keep up with homework for many, many reasons, and not just concentration problems, but also just, their people have lives, they're busy, and so forth. So, but that being said, people who really do this, really set themselves to do it. They do notice a benefit over time.
Okay.
The other thing, or the fourth final part about cognitive processing therapy, it has to do with there's sort of common belief changes that occur after going through a trauma. So people have beliefs about safety and trust and control and self-esteem, other people, relationships.
Right.
All of those things can change when you've undergone a trauma. So CPT, you talk about your beliefs in those different areas, and then the therapist helps a person find a better balance between the beliefs you had before and those you had after.
Right.
Those traumas. So a belief like no one can be trusted is changed to some people can be trusted, and I can learn who can be trusted by adapting skills and so forth. So this is how it works. So it's mostly a lot of talk about thoughts and feelings. There is an expectation that someone will talk about the details of the traumatic event, and there is an expectation, in some CPT, there's an expectation that people will do that over and over and over and over to the point where they kind of get what we say, they habituate to their story. So, for example, one technique in this method is for someone to recite their story onto a CD or a player of some kind, and then they basically listen to it over and over and over and again in the car and and at night and again, and so that the story loses its power, shocking power, because it becomes a narrative that people have to listen to over and over and recite. Now, again, as I said, I moved away from this kind of practice because I thought that seemed a little inhumane to me, to make people do that.
Yeah.
And especially when, in my view, with EMDR, you don't have to do that. People don't even have to say aloud the things they've undergone. So, that for some people, it does benefit people to do that. But again, it is a challenge. It's quite time intensive.
So how long has, I know we went into the history a little bit of EMDR. How long has CPT been around, or how was that first started to be used?
In the 80s, I would say. And then in the 80s, so cognitive behavior therapy sort of, as a therapy for anything, like say depression or anxiety, that sort of got its start, beginnings in the 50s, 60s, 70s, around through there. But in the 80s is when it kind of got its, major foothold in, it's a major, approach in all psychology. This particular variant is tailored to PTSD, but there is a cognitive behavior therapy of which this is a subset, has been around, what is that? 30 years now. And part of the reason it's easy to study this. One of the reasons it gets the press it does is because, unlike some of the therapies, this one's quite easy to study because in the past, if you remember, a lot of therapies were sort of just loosey-goosey talking therapies without real protocols, and that, you got the image of the guy lying on the couch with this guy behind. That kind of therapy, talking therapy like that's difficult to measure and study because who knows what was said and who knows what was thought. It's all whatever happens. But
and I can imagine, Robin, too, like for first responders specifically, that kind of therapy would be really frustrating because as first responders, when we come up with a problem, we want it fixed.
Exactly. You want results right away.
I don't want to sit and talk to somebody for hours because they're going to ask me what I thought about what I said and how I can fix it. Instead, you know what I mean? If I knew how to fix it, I wouldn't be here.
Exactly. And I don't I have to be respectful of this particular approach to therapy, but one of the things that I've found is that many individuals find it quite judgmental.
Oh, really?
And that the idea is that like your thoughts are wrong, your thoughts are somehow flawed, and you need to correct those flaws because your thoughts are it's your fault because you're having these thoughts, and I don't respect that. I've found over the time that people have these thoughts for entirely valid reasons, and that that people can feel like, oh, now my thoughts are wrong, and it just feels. Yeah. And of course the therapy, if it's done, it all has to do with how the practitioner is. But some practitioners can deliver a CPT in a very, very warm and humane and understanding way. So,
in the right setting with the right person.
That's right. And so what the research would suggest strongly that the nature of the therapist is what carries all therapies. But that this is, the Therapeutic Alliance is the number one a vehicle for anybody getting better for anything ever, because it's sort of all about trust and so on. But people do get results from CPT, and there are, variants of it too that have done in groups or other methods. So for many, many years it was all we had. So it's what we did, and that's how we approached it, and we did our best with the leaders in the field told us that this was the way to go, and that's how we went forward. But it's just my experience that it is not as effective as EMDR in my view and in my experience. But I'm just one person. There's big studies out there pairing them, and that the treatment effects are similar, but the advantage to EMDR is it's much more efficient.
Awesome. No, excellent. Understood. Thank you for that. That was great and very informative about a subject that I really didn't know anything about myself. So that was awesome. Do you have a story of hope for us today, Robin?
Let me think now. This is I have stories that are not necessarily first responder stories, but this is an anxiety story.
Okay.
And this is a story about a young man who was in love, and his girlfriend wanted to get married. They'd been together a long time. It was time to get married in a ceremony, and she wanted a ceremony in a church and he had such crippling anxiety due to panic attacks and things that he'd had that he thought, oh my gosh, I can't go through a wedding ceremony. I can't have people look at me while I say vows. I can't do that. That's just out. Mm-hmm. And yet he knew that he would lose her he had the risk of losing her if he didn't kind of make himself fit for a wedding. So he had to get over something he greatly feared and anticipated. So and because he was afraid he would have a panic attack during his own wedding. Right. And so he's an individual through the treatment. There's a lot of treatment that aimed at a feared future situation, something that's going to be really, really challenging. Public speaking here, in this case, getting married. Anyway, I'm happy to say that this individual was able to completely overcome his difficulties with that. He did go ahead, they are married. I think might even be expecting a baby or something now.
Oh, nice.
And the other thing about it all is that I recall calling him some months after the therapy was over saying, so, how about your anxiety? How's your, and he goes, what anxiety? What? Oh, that! Oh, yeah. I had that anxiety disorder. Like, this was a person who had been so crippled by it, he couldn't go to the grocery store. He had trouble leaving his own house. And that was for years. And he had, through treatment, progressed to the point where he couldn't even remember having an anxiety disorder.
Wow. That's excellent. Thank you. That's fantastic. Well, Robin, thank you again for giving us a nice education session.
My pleasure. Love to do it.
Perfect. And of course, we'll be back at you next month, and we'll learn about something new. But until then, Robin, be safe and take care on your many travels. Your national celebrity status that you have
Yes.
all over the world. But definitely be safe, and I'll chat with you when you get back.
Awesome. Look forward to it.
Thanks. All right, folks. That's another episode in the books. Thanks again to Minister Kelly Regan and Minister Leo Glavine for making the time to chat with us. Thanks again to my sponsors, Rest Ed Seminars, the Compass Rose Health and Wellness Center, and Dan's Sun Photography for, again, supporting the podcast. Please check them out on my website, www.uptalkpodcast.com. Please check out the website. Everything you need to know about UpTalk is on there. Links to episodes, links to guest info, photos, external links, and even a spot to send us a message. So please check that out. It's a good way to let us know via the messaging what's working, what's not, what you'd like to hear, what you'd like to learn about from Dr. Robin McGee. That would be awesome. We can't make this podcast long-term without engagement from the listeners. So I need that information from you. So please feel free to message anything, any information you might have about potential guests as well. Let us know. And that would be great. As I said before, this podcast episode is dedicated to the memory of Marc Boudreau. So what we're going to do is we're going to end this podcast a little differently than we usually do. Kevin Davison's When Those Sirens Are Gone is going to take a break this month. And instead of a moment of silence for Marc Boudreau, we're going to have a moment of celebration for Marc Boudreau's life. And you're going to get to hear a big passion in Marc Boudreau's life. You're going to get to hear some Cape Breton fiddle music. And if you haven't heard it before, if you're listening and you're not from the East Coast of Canada or aren't familiar with East Coast fiddle music, I think you're in for a treat. The music you're going to hear is an excerpt from a performance by Marc Boudreau with Ashley McIsaac, J.P. Cormier, and Alan Dewar. So as always, guys, be safe, take care of one another, and we'll chat again next month.